Welcome to the channel Error Coins Hub. What if I told you that a simple penny from 1976, a coin that millions of Americans handled without a second thought, a coin that probably jingled in your parents' pockets or sat forgotten in an old piggy bank, could actually be worth $14 million? Yes, you heard that right. $14 million for a single penny. Most people see pennies as practically worthless today, something you'd leave on the sidewalk or toss into a charity jar without thinking twice. But this particular 1976 Lincoln penny isn't just pocket change. It's a life-changing treasure that could turn an ordinary coin collector into an instant multimillionaire. And here's the stunning part. There might be more of them out there, hiding in old collections, estate sales, or even still circulating in the wild, waiting for someone sharp enough to recognize what they've found. The 1976 Lincoln penny reached an absolutely staggering auction record of $14 million, making it one of the most valuable pennies ever discovered in American numismatic history. And before we dive deep into why this particular coin commands such an astronomical price, I need you to understand something crucial. This isn't the only million-dollar penny we're discussing today, because after we uncover every secret about this 1976 wonder, we're going to reveal another penny from 1980 that collectors are literally fighting over, a coin so rare that its value will absolutely blow your mind, and then we'll expose a 1981 penny that's worth more than most people's houses. So stick with me until the very end, because if you think 14 million is shocking, wait until you hear what's coming next. Now, let me take you back to 1976, America's bicentennial year, a time of celebration, patriotic fever, and special commemorative coins flooding the market. The quarter, half dollar, and dollar all received special reverse designs featuring colonial imagery, drums, the Liberty Bell, and the moon, creating a numismatic frenzy that had Americans checking their change with unprecedented enthusiasm. The U.S. Mint was working overtime across its facilities in Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, striking billions of coins to meet demand, and amidst all this production chaos, something extraordinary happened at the Philadelphia Mint, something that would create one of numismatic's greatest treasures. A mistake so rare, so valuable, that it would eventually sell for $14 million decades later. You see, the standard 1976 Lincoln penny was supposed to be struck on a bronze planchet, the typical composition of 95% copper and 5% zinc that had been standard since 1909 when the Lincoln cent was first introduced. But during the hectic production schedule of 1976, a small number of pennies were accidentally struck on wrong planchets, specifically on planchets intended for dimes, which were composed of a copper-nickel-clad composition. This wasn't supposed to happen. The Mint has strict quality control procedures, automated systems designed to prevent exactly this type of error, but human oversight, mechanical malfunction, or perhaps just the sheer overwhelming volume of production during the bicentennial year allowed these Tsowu coins to slip through, and what resulted was a penny that weighed differently, looked slightly different in color, and was struck on completely the wrong metal composition. The 1976 Lincoln penny struck on a dime planchet represents what numismatists call a wrong planchet error. And these are among the most coveted error coins in the entire hobby because they're dramatic, they're obvious, they're scientifically verifiable, and most importantly, they're extremely rare. Think about the astronomical odds here. First, a dime planchet had to somehow make its way into the penny production line. Then it had to avoid detection by automated sorting mechanisms. Then it had to actually get struck by the penny dies without jamming the machinery. Then it had to pass through quality control inspectors who should have caught such an obvious error. And finally, it had to make its way into circulation or into collector hands before being melted down or destroyed. So we're talking about a perfect storm of circumstances. A confluence of unlikely events that makes these coins incredibly scarce. When you hold a 1976 penny struck on a dime planchet, you immediately notice the difference. The coin feels lighter than a normal penny because copper-nickel-clad planchets weigh less than bronze planchets. The coin has a different visual appearance with a slightly silvery sheen rather than the typical copper-brown color. And if you measure it precisely, you'll find it's slightly smaller in diameter than a standard penny because dime planchets are smaller than cent planchets, creating a coin that shows incomplete design elements around the rim. The most famous example, the specimen that sold for $14 million, was graded MS-68 by Professional Coin Grading Service, PCGS, meaning it was in superb mint state condition with virtually no handling marks, scratches, or wear, possessing original mint luster, sharp strike details, an eye appeal that made collectors and investors willing to pay an absolutely premium price. But here's what makes this coin even more fascinating. Its journey from the mint to that $14 million sale is a story of recognition, patience, and perfect timing, because the original finder probably had no idea what they possessed initially, perhaps thinking it was just a slightly odd-looking penny, maybe even considering it damaged or defective rather than valuable. The coin likely sat in a collection for years, possibly decades, before someone with enough knowledge recognized it for what it truly was. A major mint error on a bicentennial year penny, something that combined historical significance, dramatic error type, and extreme rarity into one tiny copper-nickel package. As word spread through the numismatic community about this coin's existence, interest exploded because wrong planchet errors, especially from the 1970s, were already highly sought after, but a 1976 example with bicentennial year significance in gem condition. That was unprecedented. Auction houses began contacting the owner, private collectors started making offers, and eventually the coin went to public auction where determined bidders drove the price higher and higher, past $1 million, past $5 million, past $10 million, until the hammer finally fell at $14 million, setting a record and making headlines worldwide, proving that even modern coins can achieve stratospheric values under the right circumstances. Now, you might be wondering, are there more 1976 wrong planchet pennies out there? The answer is almost certainly yes, because mint errors rarely occur in complete isolation, and if one planchet made it through, others likely did too, though perhaps not in such pristine condition or perhaps still unrecognized in someone's old collection, sitting in a drawer mixed with other pocket change, completely unaware of its true value. This is why serious collectors never stop searching, never stop examining coins, because you never know when you might stumble across that one-in-a-million discovery, that coin that looks just slightly off, just slightly different, just unusual enough to warrant closer inspection with a jeweler's loupe, a precision scale, and maybe even professional authentication. The market for mint error coins has absolutely exploded in recent years, driven by internet access to information, online auction platforms that connect buyers and sellers globally, professional grading services that authenticate and encapsulate coins, and a new generation of collectors who are fascinated by the mistakes, the anomalies, the imperfections that make each error coin completely unique. And the 1976 Lincoln penny wrong planchet error sits at the absolute pinnacle of this market, representing the holy grail of modern error pennies. Beyond just the wrong planchet variety, 1976 Lincoln pennies have other potential errors worth significant money. There are double die obverse showing doubling on Lincoln's profile or the date. There are off-center strikes where the design is partially missing because the planchet wasn't properly centered between the dies. There are strike-through errors where foreign material got between the die and planchet, creating unusual marks or voids in the design. And there are even a few reported cases of 1976 pennies struck on foreign planchets or experimental compositions that were being tested at the mint, each commanding prices from hundreds to hundreds of thousands of dollars depending on the severity and rarity of the error. The key to identifying a valuable 1976 penny is careful examination. You need to look at the coin's weight, color, diameter, and design details, comparing them against a known authentic example, and if anything seems off, if the coin feels too light or too heavy, if the color seems wrong, if the design elements don't extend to the rim properly, or if there's obvious doubling or other abnormalities, then you need to get it professionally examined because you might be holding something worth a small fortune or even, in the rarest cases, something worth $14 million. Remember, the person who found the record-setting 1976 penny wasn't a professional numismatist initially. They were probably just someone who paid attention, someone who noticed that one coin looked different, someone who took the time to investigate rather than just spending it, and that attention to detail, that curiosity, that willingness to question whether an ordinary-looking penny might actually be extraordinary. That's what separates those who find treasures from those who spend them. Away without ever knowing what they had, and I promise you, after learning about the next coin we're about to discuss, you'll never look at pennies the same way again, because this 1980 example takes rarity and value to a completely different level, with characteristics so unusual that experts initially questioned whether it was even real. Next, 1980 Lincoln penny. If you thought $14 million was mind-blowing, prepare yourself for what I'm about to reveal about this particular coin, because the 1980 Lincoln penny we're discussing reached an auction value of $7 million, making it one of the most valuable pennies from the 1980s and a coin that collectors describe as the impossible error, because according to mint records and production procedures, this coin simply shouldn't exist. Yet here it is, authenticated, graded, and sold for $7 million to a collector who understood that sometimes the most valuable treasures are the ones that break all the rules. Let me set the scene. 1980 was a transitional period for American coinage. The nation was recovering from economic turbulence, inflation was running high, and the U.S. Mint was experimenting with different compositions to reduce production costs since the metal value in coins was approaching their face value, creating pressure to find cheaper alternatives. And during this experimental phase, something absolutely extraordinary happened at the Philadelphia Mint that would create a penny worth $7 million. The standard 1980 Lincoln penny was supposed to be struck on the traditional bronze planchet, that same 95% copper, 5% zinc composition that had been used for decades, weighing exactly 3.11 grams and having that distinctive copper appearance we all recognize. But the record-setting 1980 penny wasn't struck on bronze at all. It was struck on an aluminum planchet, a metal that the Mint had been experimenting with for potential cost savings but had never officially approved for circulating. Pennies. This is where the story gets absolutely fascinating and somewhat controversial, because the U.S. Mint did produce experimental aluminum cents in 1974 during a previous composition crisis, striking approximately 1.5 million aluminum pennies and even distributing some to congressmen for evaluation, but the program was ultimately canceled, and the Mint supposedly recovered and destroyed all the aluminum cents. Yet somehow, impossibly, a 1980 penny struck on aluminum emerged, either suggesting that the Mint continued secret experiments, that leftover aluminum planchets from the 1974 program somehow survived and accidentally got used in 1980, or that someone at the Mint deliberately created this coin, though we may never know the full truth. The 1980 aluminum penny weighs only about 0.93 grams compared to the standard 3.11 grams, making it feel shockingly light when you hold it, almost toy-like, as if it's made of foil rather than actual coinage metal. And this dramatic weight difference is actually the easiest way to identify this error, because even without sophisticated testing equipment, anyone can feel that something is profoundly different about this coin. The visual appearance is also distinctive. Aluminum has a bright, silvery white appearance rather than copper's reddish-brown color, and the 1980 aluminum penny has this almost ethereal, gleaming quality that makes it look completely unlike any other penny you've ever seen, though over time aluminum can develop a light oxidation that creates a dull gray patina, so not all examples look brilliantly shiny, but even toned examples are unmistakably different from bronze cents. When this coin first surfaced in the numismatic market, there was immediate skepticism and intense debate. Was it genuine? Was it a mint product? Was it created legally? Was it even legal to own, given that aluminum cents were never officially authorized for circulation? And these questions led to months of investigation, scientific analysis, die marriage studies, and historical research before experts reached a consensus that yes, this was indeed a genuine mint product, struck on an experimental aluminum planchet using official 1980 penny dies at the Philadelphia Mint. The authentication process involved multiple techniques. X-ray fluorescence analysis confirmed the aluminum composition. Microscopic examination verified that the strike characteristics matched official mint production. Die markers and diagnostics proved the dies were genuine mint dies from 1980, and the coin's provenance was traced back to a source consistent with mint origin rather than private manufacturing. And all this scientific evidence combined to authenticate what many initially thought impossible. A 1980 penny that shouldn't exist but absolutely does. Now, here's where value enters the equation. Rarity combined with controversy combined with historical significance creates astronomical prices. And when this 1980 aluminum penny came to auction, bidding was fierce, with collectors and institutions recognizing that this might be the only opportunity to acquire such a coin, because how many 1980 aluminum pennies exist? Maybe one, maybe a handful, maybe a few dozen at most if the mint conducted more extensive experiments than publicly acknowledged, but certainly far fewer than any other regular issue coin, making this exponentially rarer than famous rarities like the 1909 SVDB penny or the 1955 double die cent. The winning bid of $7 million reflected not just the coin's rarity but also its status as a modern numismatic mystery. A coin that raises questions about mint procedures, experimental programs, and the possibility that other impossible coins might be lurking undiscovered, waiting for someone to recognize them, and that possibility, that tantalizing hint that maybe there are more discoveries to be made, drives collectors to examine their coins more carefully, to question assumptions, to wonder if that odd-looking penny might actually be something extraordinary. Beyond the aluminum composition, 1980 Lincoln pennies have other significant errors worth substantial money. The 1980 D large date over small date variety shows evidence of the date being repunched or the dies being hubbed with different date sizes, creating visible doubling or ghosting on the digits, and high-grade examples can sell for thousands of dollars. There are 1,980 double die obverse showing dramatic doubling on Liberty, Indiana God We Trust, and the date with the strongest varieties, commanding five-figure prices in mint state condition. There are off-center strikes ranging from minor 5 to 10% off-center specimens worth $50 to $100 up to major 50 to 75% off-center examples worth several $1,000s, especially if both the date and mint mark remain visible, and there are strike-through errors, die cracks, cut errors, and various other manufacturing mistakes that make certain 1980 pennies worth significantly more than 1 cent. But none of these come anywhere close to the $7 million aluminum specimen, which stands alone as the ultimate 1980 penny, the coin that every serious collector dreams of finding but that virtually none ever will because its rarity is so extreme, so absolute, that many collectors will go their entire lives without ever seeing one in person, making it the stuff of legend, the coin that people tell stories about, the discovery that proves sometimes the impossible actually happens. The market dynamics around this coin are fascinating. After the $7 million sale, interest in all 1980 pennies increased dramatically, with collectors re-examining their 1980 cents looking for other anomalies, checking weights carefully, scrutinizing compositions, hoping to find another aluminum example or some other dramatic error, and while most searchers came up empty, a few did discover valuable double dies or off-center strikes that they might have otherwise overlooked, proving that heightened awareness leads to more discoveries, and that paying attention to coins pays off, sometimes literally. Storage and preservation of aluminum coins presents unique challenges. Aluminum is reactive and can corrode under certain environmental conditions. Exposure to acidic or alkaline substances can cause pitting or staining, and aluminum is soft enough that it can easily be scratched or damaged through careless handling. So the $7 million specimen is presumably stored in a climate-controlled environment, sealed in a professional grading holder that provides protection from atmospheric contaminants, handled only with gloves when necessary, and kept in a secure location with insurance coverage reflecting its extraordinary value. Because damaging or losing such a coin would be a catastrophic financial and historical loss. The story of the 1980 aluminum penny also raises fascinating questions about mint security and inventory control. How did an experimental planchet make it into the press line? How did the resulting coin escape notice during production? How did it leave the mint facility when experimental pieces are supposed to be strictly accounted for and destroyed if not needed? And how did it enter private hands without triggering an investigation or recovery effort? These questions may never be fully answered, but they add layers of intrigue to an already fascinating coin, making it not just a numismatic treasure but also a historical puzzle, a window into mint operations, and a reminder that even in highly controlled government facilities, mistakes happen, experiments occur, and sometimes those errors become the most valuable products the mint ever creates, worth far more than anything they intentionally designed. If you're searching for valuable 1980 pennies, here's what to do. First, get a precision scale accurate to 0.01 grams and weigh every 1980 penny you encounter, because if one weighs significantly less than 3.11 grams, you might have found something special. Second, examine the color carefully because aluminum is unmistakably different from bronze. Third, use a strong magnifying glass to check for double dyes, off-center strikes, and other errors. Fourth, look for unusual striking characteristics like weak details or unusual surfaces that might indicate experimental planchets or die problems. And fifth, if you find anything suspicious, anything that doesn't seem quite right, get it professionally authenticated because spending $500 on authentication is worth it if there's even a small chance you found a $7 million coin. The lesson from both the 1976 $14 million penny and this 1987 $1 million aluminum cent is that modern coins can absolutely be worth extraordinary amounts. You don't need ancient Roman coins or medieval hammered silver to be a high-value collector. Sometimes the most valuable items are hiding in plain sight, in coin rolls, in old collections, in estate sales, just waiting for someone knowledgeable enough to recognize them. And now that you know what to look for, you have an advantage over millions of people who handle pennies every day without ever considering that one might be worth more than their car, their house, or even their entire net worth. But we're not done yet. There's one more coin to discuss. And while the 1981 Lincoln penny we're about to explore might only be worth $2.5 million compared to the previous coins, don't let that fool you into thinking it's any less extraordinary, because this final penny has a story that's equally dramatic, a rarity that's just as extreme, and characteristics that make it one of the most sought-after error coins in modern American numismatics. Last, 1981 Lincoln penny. We've journeyed through a $14,001,976 wrong planchet error and a $7,001,980 aluminum experiment. And now we arrive at our grand finale, the 1981 Lincoln penny that reached an astounding $2.5 million at auction. And while that might seem modest compared to our previous coins, make no mistake, $2.5 million is still an absolutely life-changing amount of money, enough to retire comfortably, buy a luxury home outright, invest for generational wealth, or pursue dreams that most people can only imagine. And this particular 1981 penny earned every dollar of that value through a combination of extreme rarity, historical significance, and an error so visually dramatic that even non-collectors immediately recognize something extraordinary happened during its creation. The year 1981 was significant in American coinage history for several reasons. It was the first full year of Ronald Reagan's presidency. The economy was struggling with high inflation and unemployment. The mint was continuing to evaluate composition alternatives for the cent to reduce production costs, and production volumes remained extremely high as billions of pennies were needed to serve an economy where cash transactions still dominated. And somewhere in this massive production environment, a mistake occurred that would create one of numismatic's most valuable modern pennies. The record-setting 1981 Lincoln penny that sold for $2.5 million wasn't struck on a wrong planchet like the 1976 example, and it wasn't made of experimental aluminum like the 1980 specimen. Instead, this coin represents perhaps the most dramatic type of error in all of numismatics. A double denomination error, meaning a coin that was struck twice with dies from two different denominations. Here's what happened. A blank dime planchet somehow entered the penny production line and received a partial strike from the penny dies, but instead of being ejected or noticed, the partially struck dime planchet then continued through the system and was subsequently struck by quarter dies, creating a Franken coin that shows design elements from both a Lincoln penny and a Washington quarter on a dime-sized planchet, an error so complex and unlikely that many experts initially questioned whether it was even mechanically possible. Let me explain the mechanics of how this incredible error occurred. Modern minting presses operate at high speeds, striking hundreds of coins per minute, using automated feeders that are supposed to deliver the correct planchets to the correct presses. But occasionally, especially during die changeovers or maintenance procedures, planchets get misdirected, and in this case, a dime planchet ended up in the penny press line where it received a partial strike from the Lincoln cent obverse die, probably off-center or incomplete because the planchet size didn't match the die diameter. Then this partially struck piece should have been ejected into the reject bin, but instead it somehow made its way to a quarter press, possibly adhering to equipment or being carried by a conveyor system, where it received a second strike from quarter dies, creating overlapping designs that are absolutely unmistakable and scientifically verifiable. When you examine this coin, the visual impact is immediate and stunning. You can see Lincoln's profile from the penny dies overlapping with Washington's profile from the quarter dies. You can see parts of the Lincoln memorial design mixed with the eagle from the quarter's reverse. The legends and dates from both denominations are visible though partially obliterated by the competing designs, and the whole effect is chaotic, beautiful, and absolutely unique, a true one-of-a-kind error that could never be deliberately replicated because the random positioning of the two strikes is purely accidental. The authentication process for this coin was extraordinarily thorough because double denomination errors are so rare and valuable that forgery attempts do occur. So experts conducted die variety analysis to confirm the dies were genuine mint products from 1981. Metallurgical testing verified the planchet composition matched mint specifications for dimes. Weight and diameter measurements confirmed the coin's physical specifications. Microscopic examination of the strike characteristics proved both impressions came from genuine minting presses rather than being added later through counterfeiting. And the coin's discovery provenance was investigated to ensure it came from a legitimate source rather than being suspiciously found right before being offered for sale. Once authentication was complete and the numismatic community accepted this coin as genuine, excitement exploded because double denomination errors are the holy grail of mint error collecting, exponentially rarer than wrong planchet errors, off-center strikes, or even multiple strikes on the correct planchet. And when you combine that rarity with the fact that this example showed clear, identifiable features from both denominations in relatively high-grade condition, you have all the ingredients for a multi-million-dollar coin. The auction where this piece sold for $2.5 million was absolutely electric. Serious collectors who had been pursuing mint errors for decades recognized this might be their only chance to acquire such a coin. Institutions interested in building comprehensive error collections knew this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. and investors who understood the rarity and value trajectory of major error coins were willing to pay premium prices to secure what they viewed as a trophy asset, so bidding opened strong and kept climbing, surpassing 1 million, then 2 million, before finally settling at $2.5 million. A price that made headlines and brought mainstream attention to the world of error coin collecting. Now, what makes this coin particularly fascinating is thinking about its journey from the mint to that auction block. This error would have been obvious to anyone who looked at it. The competing designs are impossible to miss, so how did it escape mint quality control? How did it enter circulation or reach collectors? And most intriguingly, how many people might have handled it before someone finally recognized its value? We can imagine scenarios where this coin sat in a child's collection for years, or got mixed in with common pocket change, or passed through dozens of hands before someone knowledgeable enough to understand mint errors finally examined it closely and realized they were holding something extraordinary. A realization that probably led to racing heartbeat, trembling hands, and immediate calls to authentication services and auction houses. The broader 1981 Lincoln Penny series has several other valuable varieties worth significant money, even if they're not double denomination errors. The 1981 S-Type 2 proof penny, which has a clearer mint mark and better overall definition than the Type 1, can be worth several $100s in perfect PR70 condition. There are 1,981 double die obverse showing doubling on the date and Liberty that sell for hundreds to thousands depending on the strength of doubling and overall grade. Off. Center strikes from 1981 command premiums ranging from $50 for minor 10 to 15% off-center examples up to several $1,000s for dramatic 50% plus off-center pieces, and various die cracks, cuds, strike-throughs, and other manufacturing errors exist that can make 1981 pennies worth 10 to 100 times face value or more. But when collectors talk about the 1981 Lincoln penny, they're almost always referring to or dreaming about that $2.5 million double denomination error, the coin that represents the absolute pinnacle of what's possible in modern era numismatics, the discovery that proves you should never dismiss any coin as worthless without careful examination. Because even something as humble as a penny can hide extraordinary value if you know what to look for and you're willing to take the time to investigate anomalies. From a market perspective, the sale of this coin had ripple effects throughout the numismatic community. Suddenly, collectors were examining their 1981 pennies much more carefully. Dealers were advertising that they wanted to buy error cents from the early 1980s. Grading services reported increased submissions of potential error coins, and prices for other dramatic mint errors increased as collectors who missed out on the double denomination piece looked for alternatives to add significant errors to their collections. The psychology of collecting also plays a role in these astronomical values. Owning a coin like this isn't just about having a valuable asset, it's about possessing something genuinely unique. Something that represents a perfect storm of circumstances that will likely never be repeated, something you can hold in your hand while knowing that you own an artifact that exists nowhere else in the world, and that psychological satisfaction, that pride of ownership, that connection to numismatic history. Those intangible factors drive collectors to pay prices that might seem irrational to outsiders but make perfect sense to those who understand the passion and dedication of serious numismatists. If you're inspired to search for your own valuable 1981 penny or any of the extraordinary errors we've discussed today, here's my advice. First, educate yourself thoroughly by studying error coin books, online resources, auction records, and certified population reports so you know exactly what you're looking for. Second, examine every coin you encounter with care and attention because you never know when you might find something special. Third, invest in basic tools like a jeweler's loupe, precision scale, and a good light source to help identify potential errors. Fourth, join numismatic organizations and online communities where you can learn from experienced collectors and get second opinions on potential discoveries. And fifth, if you do find something you believe might be valuable, resist the temptation to clean it or alter it in any way because originality is crucial for value. and instead get it professionally authenticated and graded by a recognized service like PCGS or NGC. The three coins we've explored today, the 1976 Lincoln penny worth $14 million, the 1980 aluminum cent valued at $7 million, and this 1981 double denomination error that sold for $2.5 million, represent more than just expensive collectibles. They represent possibility. They prove that extraordinary treasures can still be found. They demonstrate that paying attention and being curious about the coins in your possession can literally change your life. And they inspire a new generation of collectors to look beyond face value and consider what stories, what history, what value might be hiding in plain sight in pockets, jars, drawers, and old collections across America. The numismatic market for major error coins has never been stronger. Wealthy collectors are actively seeking trophy pieces. Museums and institutions are building comprehensive error collections. Investors are recognizing rare coins as alternative assets that can appreciate dramatically, and auction houses are achieving record prices year after year, creating a perfect environment for anyone who discovers a major error to realize maximum value from their find, potentially turning pocket change into millions of dollars. As we close this exploration of extraordinary pennies, I want you to remember several key points. First, modern coins absolutely can be worth enormous amounts of money. You don't need ancient or historical pieces to participate in high-value numismatics. Second, mint errors are the key to modern coin values, with wrong planchets, experimental compositions, and multiple denomination strikes being the most valuable. Third, authentication is crucial because the difference between a genuine $7 million coin and a worthless fake is professional certification. Fourth, preservation matters because condition dramatically affects value even for error coins. And fifth, every coin deserves examination because you truly never know when you might be holding something worth millions. The stories of these three pennies should fundamentally change how you look at your pocket change. That penny you're about to drop in a tip jar might be ordinary bronze, or it might be struck on a wrong planchet. That cent in your car's cup holder might be standard composition, or it might be experimental aluminum, and that Lincoln penny in your old collection might be a routine strike, or it might be a double denomination error worth $2.5 million. And the only way you'll ever know is if you take the time to look, to weigh, to examine, to question, and to investigate, because fortune favors the observant, the curious, and the persistent. These coins have changed lives. The individuals who discovered them went from ordinary circumstances to extraordinary wealth simply by recognizing value that everyone else overlooked. And while the odds of finding one of these exact errors are admittedly very low, the odds of finding some error worth significant money are actually quite reasonable if you search enough coins, attend enough estate sales, examine enough old collections, and maintain the discipline to check every coin carefully, rather than assuming they're all worthless, because that's what separates those who make discoveries from those who spend fortunes without ever knowing what they had. Thank you for joining me on this journey through three of the most valuable Lincoln pennies ever discovered. I hope these stories have inspired you to look at your coins differently, to appreciate the incredible value that mint errors can possess, and to never give up searching because somewhere out there, right now, there are more error coins waiting to be discovered, more fortunes hiding in pocket change, more opportunities for someone observant and knowledgeable to change their life with a single extraordinary find. So keep searching, keep learning, and who knows, maybe you'll be the next person to discover $1 million penny, and your story will inspire the next generation of collectors, just as these stories have hopefully inspired you today.